Hello and welcome to the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Tyler, and we are your favorite Orioles podcast for off-season news and updates. Today, I'm going to continue our run around the diamond, positional overviews and previews for the Baltimore Orioles, looking back at 2024, looking forward to maybe what that position will look like in 2025. Up until now, just a quick recap. We've looked at second base, first base, and shortstop. We went in that order, kind of backwards. We're going to finish up the infield at third base, unless you count catcher as the infield. Maybe you count pitcher as the infield. I don't know. We haven't gotten there yet, but we are going to finish up with third base for today. Next episode, we'll move on. I believe Eli is going to do the next episode, so he'll kind of pick which position he's going to do to that point. But if you're interested in first base, second base, shortstop, go back and listen to previous episodes. Today, we're going to talk about third base. And, admittedly, I feel like there's not too much in-depth analysis to go into. If you watched the Orioles this year, you kind of know what happened there. It was good, but some injuries got in the way. We'll talk about it in just a second here. Before I do that, a little housekeeping. First, a reminder, we're part of the Believe Podcast Network. Head over to Believe.com, BLEAV.com, and you can search over there for all kinds of shows. If there is an interest you have, especially in the sports world, Believe probably has a podcast for it. So I would encourage you, go over there. There are other Orioles podcasts on there as well. While we appreciate you guys listening to us, there are other folks as well. So please go over to Believe.com, find a podcast that you might like, and stick around there. In addition, we got to shout out our sponsor for the episode. Of course, it's Bet Online. They've been our sponsor for a long time now, and they are continuing to do that throughout the offseason. So Bet Online. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen. They have the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, and college basketball to NHL, UFC, and MMA. So if you're interested, head over to BetOnline today to get in the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. That's BetOnline. The game starts here. Thanks to BetOnline for supporting the Warehouse Podcast, as well as other shows on the Believe Podcast Network. So, to third base. The main thing to talk about, I think, at third base this year is how injuries kind of hung over the second half for the position. We know that Jordan Westburg was, excellent, particularly offensively in the first half of the season, made the All-Star team, played really well, and then literally the trade deadline happens the day after. He fractures his hand on a hit by pitch and misses most of the second half. Comes back at the very end of September, plays in the wild card round, but we missed him for essentially 2 months of the season. Ramon Urias kind of steps in his place. Obviously, Urias has been around the roster all season, has been around the Orioles for a long time now. He steps in sort of in Westberg's stead for the most part in those 2 months. However, he himself also had an injury at the end of August to his ankle. I think he was in Colorado, kind of rolled up his ankle trying to cover third base, missed almost a month with that injury. He again came back at the end of September and was part of the playoff roster as well. But in general, I think we kind of get the idea that the third base picture is not totally complete because we didn't get a full season from any one person. The Orioles kind of had to, mix and match things as the season went on. We had Emmanuel Rivera come in near the end of the season, kind of be sort of a pleasant surprise. But again, not an all-star level sort of contender. So that's kind of the backdrop of the third base situation for the Baltimore Orioles this year. I think if you watched Orioles baseball, you're aware of that, of course. But I think let's look at some of the numbers from the third base position for the Orioles this past season. So you can see Jordan Westburg led the way, had a 125 WRC plus, and was worth 2.8 F WAR, so 2.8 wins above replacement, and that's while only playing in 107 games. So if you add another 40% to or 60% to his overall numbers, he's up above a 3-win, 4-win, probably around a 4-win player, which is fantastic. And I think that kind of accurately reflects the sort of impact he made in his first full big league season. I think his rookie status technically expired last year, but he was kind of in the lineup, out of the lineup. I don't think the Orioles exactly knew what to do with him just yet. This year we saw, the full, his full ability on display. Just didn't get quite a full season out of him. As I mentioned, Ramon Urias steps in, does a really nice job as well. He actually has a 115 WRC plus, and I want to take a look and see, what those numbers look like against his entire career because I've always kind of considered Ramon Urias like a very good player that if he wasn't with the Baltimore Orioles, who are, currently in a state where they are trying to contend year to year, trying to, win divisions, make the playoffs, make deep runs in the playoffs. I think Ramon Urias would start for a lot of teams at third base. Not huge power, not, crazy offensive output, but he is an average to slightly above average hitter. He's got a gold glove in his cabinet. We saw that ability kind of, backtrack, I think, these last 2 years. But that sort of resume he's got, I think, is worth something in Major League Baseball. And I think Ramon Urias would start on a lot of Major League Baseball teams. And I want to say that because I feel like Urias received a lot of criticism, especially early on in the season when he wasn't playing particularly well, that a lot of people were saying, get him out of here. We want Kobe Mayo up here. At least get Mayo some at bats. Jackson Holliday was back in the minors. Let's get Jackson Holliday back up. Let's give him some at bats. There was a lot of that talk of like, just get these young guys up here. We don't need these I don't know, just these warm bodies up here in the form of a Ramon Urias. But I think we saw as the season wore on the value of a Ramon Urias in your organization, on your major league roster. This is a guy that can step in and be a serviceable replacement level player to above right away. He's got experience. He's had success in the big league, in big league situations. There is value to having that guy on your roster. And I think the Orioles saw that in a big way this year. It's very similar to the way they saw the value of having an Albert Suarez in the pitching situation. Now, Albert Suarez was a different beast. He obviously hadn't played Major League Baseball for a long time. That was more of a gamble. Urias is much more of a sure thing. This is a guy that has had recent success in the big league. So I always felt that the criticism for him was overblown. And we saw that, Holiday comes up, struggles. Kobe Mayo comes up, struggles. Those weren't guys that you could say, okay, we need somebody to play every day, just give them the position. They tried to do that with Jackson Holiday, and it just really, really was not working for them. And when the playoffs came around, Holiday was not starting for the Orioles anymore. And Mayo certainly wasn't in the picture there. All that to say, so Ramon Urias, his numbers quite good overall. 254 batting average, 322 on base, 423 slugging for a 115 WRC plus. That's 15% above league average. Again, offense was down across the league for most of this year. So in a typical season, it probably would have been more like a 110 WRC plus, but still above league average in a typical season. I think that's really, really impressive there. Jordan, and sticking on Ramon Urias for 1 second, because this is sort of the tale of the two halves here. First half numbers: 233 batting average, 304 on base, 377 slug with 4 home runs. That was in 56 games. In the second half of the season, a 44 game sample, a smaller sample size, he had 7 home runs, so 3 more home runs than in the first half. 278 batting average, 343 on base, and a 473 slug for an 819 OPS. Those are numbers that aren't just like, decent for a bench bat. Those are tremendous numbers for a starting everyday, third baseman. Maybe not like the total power you want with 7 home runs in 44 games. Like maybe you want more like 10 to 15 or something. But in general, those are really, really good numbers that I think, it's worth applauding that. And I think for parts of the second half of the season when the Orioles offense was like falling apart, Ramon Urias was one of the few players, I think him and Cedric Mullins, and Gunnar continuing to be good, but not like MVP level Gunnar of the first half. It was really those three that were kind of cobbling things together for large parts of the second half. And yes, the team wasn't as good, clearly, but the fact that they did anything at all kept the team about 500 to kind of get them into the playoffs. So Ramon Urias, sort of the unsung hero of the Orioles for the last 5 years almost, but almost certainly for this past season, Ramon Urias, I think folks did start to understand his value in the second half of the season after they didn't early on. But I think, again, he deserves a lot of credit for his play in the second half of the season. Now, talking about third base of the now and the future, if Jordan Westburg is healthy, he is the third baseman. That's why I don't think this episode needs to be overly, analytical or anything like that. Jordan Westburg, we've seen when he's healthy, is the Orioles' best option at third base. And that's not to say he's the best of a bad bunch. He is an all-star level player as he exists right now. His numbers last year: 264 batting average, 312 on base, and a 481 slug. Those numbers aren't terribly different than Urias, except for the slug. The slug is almost 60 points higher. He hit 18 home runs in 107 games, 447 plate appearances. So just that little bit more power than Urias has for a 125 WRC plus. So again, 25% above the league average, 2.8 FWAR, 2.8 FWAR rather. Really good stuff from Jordan Westburg. It's a shame we didn't get to see him play the entire season, but it's really fantastic either way. Now I want to look at Jordan Westburg's splits because I do believe there was some drop off there between early on and later in the season. I think if I'm remembering correctly, he was a player that did well early on and then faded, I think, along with a lot of the Orioles offense in the second half. Now, as I said, he wasn't as much of a part of the second half as he probably would have wanted to be, obviously. But yeah, okay. So first half, he hit 271 with a 318 on base and a 496 slug. Second half, which for him was just 18 games because it was the All-Star break. It's about 2 weeks, maybe a little bit more than the trade deadline, and he got hurt right after the trade deadline. He hit 233 with a 289 on base and a 411 slug for a 693 OPS. So clearly Westburg was starting to trail off a little bit. So I think in my brain, I think more about pre-All-Star break Jordan Westburg, which was really fantastic. He struggled a little bit in the second half, but who's to say he wouldn't have, picked things up if he kept kind of learning and developing and things like that. So you hope that those things happen for him in the offseason going into next year, and he can kind of pick right back up where he was in the first half and really spark the offense. But yeah, that's like the long and the short of it is Jordan Westburg is the Orioles' third baseman, provided he's healthy, because I think, first base, the Orioles did pick up the option on Ryan O'Hearn. And I know I said in a last episode, I think I was wrong about his 2025 salary by about half. I think it was like 3.5 is what I said it was, but that's what his 2024 salary was. I think 2025 is like $7 or $8 million, which I still think is probably, worthwhile for O'Hearn, but it also puts him on the chopping block in terms of a trade. I think it's understandable for the Orioles to pick that up, but maybe they trade him. But this episode's about third base. Westburg is the third baseman. Urias, I believe this is his final year of arbitration eligibility. No, actually, next year as well. He'll be arbitration eligible this offseason and next offseason. And what I'll look for here is his projected salary for 2025. Okay, so I found projected salaries for 2025 for Ramon Urias. He is going to be at $3.1 million according to MLB Trade Rumors. They're usually pretty good about this. So 3.1 million plus Westburg making, probably league minimum, close to it. Maybe they'll up it a little bit, but that you're putting about $4 million into the third base position to give you a rock solid starter in Westburg, dependable backup Urias who can probably rove around, play a little second base, first base. I think that seems plenty worth it. I expect the Orioles to offer him arbitration, and he'll be back in 2025. So that's sort of the known commodities of third base for the Baltimore Orioles. The unknowns. First, let's stick on the arbitration eligible folks for a second. So one, Emmanuel Rivera. He's arbitration eligible for the Orioles this coming season. The number that he is estimated at is $1.4 million. I'm not so sure the Orioles are going to do that. Not because Rivera wasn't quite good for them. There's a discussion to be had there about if they like Rivera enough. Do they think he can be a slightly more controlled asset than Ramon Urias to do something similar? Rivera, to remind folks, came over from the Marlins last year and was pretty good for the Orioles. Now was not very good for the Marlins in 96 games last year. He had a 214 batting average, 294 OBP, and a 269 slug. Very bad for an OPS plus of 55. Horrific. For the Orioles, he got into 27 games, hit 313 with a 370 on base and a 578 slugging for a 173 OPS plus. Fantastic, incredible, amazing. And he also came with a reputation as a very good defensive third baseman. And I think we kind of saw that. Like, I don't know that I feel like I recall him making any crazy web gems or anything like that. But I do remember him being pretty solid at the position And he was another one that down the stretch, nobody was really hitting, but Rivera was hitting. Um, but the problem with all of that is, look at his history in Major League Baseball. It's not particularly strong on the offensive side of things. Prior to this season and his 27 game cameo with the Orioles at a 173 OPS plus, the only other time he's been an above league hitter, above league average hitter was 2022 with the Diamondbacks at 104 OPS plus, and that was a 39 game stretch. So whenever he's had these longer stretches, he's been below average. In 2022, that was, there was part of that was spent with the Royals, part of it with the Diamondbacks, better with the Royals in that instance. And then this year, obviously, with the Marlins and the Orioles, he was much better with the Orioles, but across a total of 123 games this year, he had an OPS plus of 82, so 18% below league average in that regard. I think in general, you're going to take the totality of somebody's career, not just a snippet where they did well. And if you're comparing the two, Rivera plus versus Urias, clearly Urias is the far better player. Is he worth double the salary? I would say probably, given where the Orioles are in their development. If this was 5 years ago and the Orioles were going to be putrid anyway with Ramon Urias or not, and you could pay him 3 million or pay Rivera 1.4, I think you just keep Rivera for 1.4, try to trade Urias for something. But in the situation the Orioles are in, where every win matters, every run matters, I'd rather have Ramon Urias on the team. Now, that's not to say they couldn't non-tender Rivera, maybe offer him a minor league deal and bring him back in some capacity that way. Maybe Rivera would even be open to that. But I don't see the Orioles giving him $1.4 million to stay on the 40-man roster and try to fight with some other guys to stick around. I just don't see that happening. So I expect Rivera will be a non-tender candidate, and Urias will stick around. Now, the other big mystery, not mystery necessarily, but question mark, I guess, is Coby Mayo. Coby Mayo, we know, is a top prospect for not just the Orioles, but all of professional baseball. He is, got power. He has a big arm. He does a lot of things well that are supposedly going to make him a very good Major League Baseball player. Now, he came up last year and really, really struggled. Let me make sure I look at his numbers for the totality of the season. I've now said totality twice in I think 2 minutes, and that's probably a record for pretty much any podcast, but definitely this podcast. Coby Mayo got into 17 games with the Orioles, batted 0.98 with a 196 on base percentage and an 0.98 slugging percentage. So he had 4 hits on 46 plate appearances, struck out 22 times, walked 4 times. 47.8% strikeout rate, 8.7% walk rate. A lot of numbers that aren't great. It's also not the first time we've seen an Orioles player come up from AAA after doing really well there and struggle a lot in the majors. Adley wasn't good out of the gate. Colton Cowser wasn't good out of the gate. Gunnar, we saw him be good at the end of 2022, struggle a little bit at the beginning of 2023 before he figured it out. There's ebbs and flows to this. Certainly nobody's giving up on Coby Mayo. However, there could be reason to give up on Coby Mayo at third base specifically. One is the Orioles are, as we just kind of explained, I think the Orioles are mostly set at third base for the foreseeable future. Westburg is going to be around for a long time. He's going to hit really well for a long time, I would imagine. Defensively, the stuff is mixed for Westburg, but I have a tough time saying that Mayo is going to be better. And as I speak about the mixed metrics on Westburg, he did spend a lot of time at second base early this season as they were figuring second base out. It was Tony Kemp for 2 seconds. It was Mateo. It was Holiday for 2 weeks. Then he went back down. Westburg went over there. Urias played third. I think ideally for the Orioles, Westburg is the third baseman. Henderson is the shortstop. Jackson Holiday is the second baseman. First base is a bit of a question mark. And that's where Coby Mayo comes back into the fold, is Mayo could go over to first base. Because as I said I'm sorry, I'm jumping all around here, but Westburg's metrics at third base were quite good. According to Baseball Savant, he was worth 5 outs above average at third, whereas at second base, he was -8 runs above average. So I think the Orioles want him at third base. He performs better at third base. He can hit for enough power to be the third baseman. If he plays every day at third base, he's probably going to hit 25 to 30 home runs. He's going to play good enough defense. These metrics, if he's at five outs above average, given the innings he played, that is almost like a Gold Glove level production at third base as well. Jordan Westburg's a third baseman. Gunnar Henderson, no questions, a second baseman. Where's Kobe Mayo going to go? He's not. He's not a second baseman, obviously. First base, people have talked about, but wasting his arm. Right field, potentially, we've got an opening there if Anthony Santander signs elsewhere. Obviously, Colton Cowser's the left fielder for sure. He was very good this year, especially defensively. You're not moving him. So Mayo becomes, first base, right field, DH. I think that's more his realm at this moment. So does Kobe Mayo even feature into the third base conversation? For me, not so much in 2025. I think if it's something he's got in his back pocket that he can do occasionally, I'm probably fine with that. But it doesn't look like Kobe Mayo is going to be the everyday first base or third baseman rather for the Baltimore Orioles. So for the point of this episode, do we talk about Kobe Mayo too much? I wouldn't focus too much on it because I just don't think that's in the cards for 2025. It just doesn't make a lot of logical sense. There's been questions about his defensive abilities for a long time now. He's a bit lumbering. He's got the strong arm, but is an accurate arm. I think these are all legitimate questions, and I just don't see how he fits in above these other guys anyway. Um, Whereas at first base, things are a little bit wide open over there. Ryan O'Hearn, maybe he'll be back, maybe he'll be traded. We know the option got picked up. Similar with Mountcastle, we know he's arbitration eligible. They're not going to non-tender him. He's not that kind of player, but would they trade him? I'm not saying you're going to insert Kobe Mayo as the starter at first base, but I think there's questions to ask there to maybe get him in the mix there occasionally at first base, maybe in the mix in right field. Maybe there's a platoon situation where Mayo plays, right field against hard, tough lefties, so Heston Kjerstad can sit the bench those days. Maybe against righties, you want to get Kjerstad back in the mix at right field. You get Mayo in at first base, or you DH him. I feel like that's sort of that orbit of Kjerstad, O'Hearn, Mountcastle, Mayo, potentially a veteran that they add to the mix either as an outfielder or a first baseman could factor in there as well. But Kobe Mayo as a third baseman with the Baltimore Orioles, it just doesn't seem to fit at the moment. And I think that's probably where I would leave the conversation with Mayo. I'm open to conversations there. But that's kind of my read on the situation, just given like where things stand with the Orioles, current situation, where they want to get to. I don't see how Kobe Mayo playing third base really helps the Baltimore Orioles in 2025. I do see situations where his bat in the lineup helps, but to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense at third base. So I think that's kind of my summation. And I know I didn't really go terribly in depth because I feel like it's fairly straightforward for the Orioles at the hot corner. Westberg's the guy. And you keep Urias around because he's cheap, especially in conjunction with Westburg making very little. To spend $4 million on basically an all-star level third base situation between Urias and Westburg, and then the flexibility that they both have technically to play some second base if that's needed. I feel pretty good about that. Urias even plays first base occasionally, has played first base occasionally. I feel good about that. You've got Mayo waiting in the wings in AAA. Potentially he can play third base if he needs to, but ideally not. And then beyond that, I'm not sure how much insurance you can really build into a position as a major league team. If you got two guys who can do the job and a third young guy that can, in a pinch figure it out, that feels like a pretty good situation to me. And the Orioles are now in a spot where for the next 5 years, they don't really have to worry about third base too darn much because Westberg's injury wasn't, some catastrophic whatever. He broke his hand by getting hit by a pitch, a little bit fluky. He came back in time for this season. By all understanding, he should have a fully healthy offseason to get ready for the spring and be good to go opening day. So some positivity for the Orioles for now, for the future. That's what I see for third base. It was really good in 2024. I expect similar production in 2025. Hopefully Westburg stays healthy the entire time and makes another All-Star game and can, help the Orioles offense maintain some consistency that it just didn't really have in 2024. So that's my read on the third base situation for the Orioles now and in the future. Let me know what you think in the comments of this video, of this podcast on social media at the Warehouse Pod. You can reach us. Also, email the show if you have thoughts at the Warehouse Pod at gmail.com. If you like the show and haven't subscribed, please do so. If maybe you're an Orioles fan that knows other Orioles fans and they like podcasts, tell them about our show and get us out there, help us reach more folks, and we'd really appreciate it. We're going to be covering stuff all off season. I think right now is typically a pretty slow period. Not many free agents have signed anywhere, and if they have, it's been for pretty low money. I think the market's kind of waiting on Juan Soto to go somewhere, Corbin Burns to go somewhere. Obviously, the Orioles are said to be in the mix for Burns to bring him back, but who knows there. So sort of in this dead period, we're going to keep going through the position reviews. Those should be wrapped up here in the next 2 weeks or so, and then we will move on to maybe prognosticating on what the Orioles should do at the winter meetings and moving forward. So if you think that sounds cool, or if people think that sounds cool, tell them about the show and get them to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating or a thumbs up and write us a positive review. That would really be awesome and help us reach more people. But that's all I've got for this episode, reviewing the Orioles 2024 third base situation and looking forward into 2025. I appreciate you all for listening so much. As I said at the beginning, my name is Tyler. This is the Warehouse Podcast as a part of the Believe Podcast Network. Go to BeleaV.com to get involved with our show and others. And yeah, thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. See you.